Why do you love hip hop, and what do you love about it?
Wow, I love hip hop. You know, when I first started, getting into doing music videos and being part of Video Music Box, young kids, younger than me, were into hip hop. And I come from more like Earth, Wind and Fire and those type of days. And there was this passion about the music and a passion about the beats. And I was a DJ, and I started to see the difference between what I had been listening to for whatever, 10 or 15 years before that, and what was getting ready to happen, this hip hop thing. And the passion for it, and the dancers, and I realized that this was something that was new, and I wanted to be part of it, because I didn't start off with, listening to Earth, Wind and Fire, but this was something new that I could be part of from the beginning, and that's why I got involved.
And there's something about old school hip hop and hip hop in general that just is sort of this power and passion and rawness of
Yes.
the lyrics and the music. I mean, talk to me about that.
Yeah, I mean, Chuck D said, hip hop is, like CNN, black CNN for the hood, because the things that they were saying in the songs were happening on blocks across the country and across the world. And so you got information that maybe you didn't have cable, or maybe you didn't read the New York Times, but you got it out of a hip hop song.
Documenting hip hop and music, this music, is as important as documenting any other type of genre of music. And that's something that became a passion for you.
Yeah. I realized when I first started getting into television that some of my favorite shows were either thrown away, or they couldn't find them, and I was like, what happened to these things? And they threw it out, nobody knew. And by mistake or intentionally, I was like, how could this possibly happen? And I was like, I have to do this, and I have to preserve it, and we have to keep it so 40 years from now we can look at it. And that was in 1983. So here we are, 39 years later, and it's coming into fruition. So I knew it was important. I didn't want to see what happened to funk and soul and jazz happen to hip hop, and that's why I preserved it.
And it's eventually became sort of capturing these moments. I mean, capturing real moments, not the presented stuff on MTV or the sort of slick videos, but just sort of the real moments and real people as it was happening.
Yeah. People want to see the raw footage of someone performing in a park jam, or the basement of some club or something. It's funny because a young guy works with me. He always says, "Why did you guys always perform in basements?" I was like, "That wasn't a basement. That was to us, it was a nice place at the time." But all of those raw, the crowd, the audio wasn't the best, the lighting definitely wasn't the best, but it just gives you the essence of what was going on in the beginning of hip hop.
And how did you start the show?
I went to college and I graduated. It was my last internship, was working at WNYC Channel 31. Mm-hmm. And they said, look, if you graduate, we'll hire you. So I graduated. They hired me as an engineer. I started working behind the scenes, doing camera, lighting, technical director, all this different stuff, more behind the scenes. And I was looking at the programs that we aired, and I was like, we have to have something cooler than this on the station. And one day these tapes came in and had these videos that artists were performing. And I looked at it and I said, why don't we play this on TV? And everybody's like, what are you talking about? And so I wrote a little script, just something simple that I learned from college, and said, oh, well, I can make an intro and talk, and then we'll play a video, and then I'll talk. But I didn't want to be on camera. I never wanted to be seen. I just wanted to hear like a voiceover, you hear my voice. And then we started doing it, and it started getting a response, and people enjoyed it. And then they said, you have to be on TV. And I was like, no, I don't want to be a personality. And then I made the transition to you actually saw me on camera.
And so here is this first of its kind type of show on public access that comes on at 3:30 in the afternoon, and people started to rush home to see that they could watch this because this was fresh, this was new.
Yeah, it was so new. It was like the trending thing. We say trending now, but it was the trending thing back then in the streets, because people saw something that they never got an opportunity to see. You got to remember, this is pre-internet. So There's no YouTube, there's no Instagram, there's nothing. Whatever you see on this show is new. And if you missed it, you don't know. You're not up on what's really happening. So a kid in the Bronx can find out what's going on in Brooklyn. Like, that's how far we were away from each other back then. And you learned a lot. You know, you learned about different genres of music as well.
Do you remember in the early days, like one of the kind of bigger shows or one of the shows from the early days that sort of stands out for you?
Absolutely. When I was a kid, I used to watch American Bandstand with Dick Clark.
Yeah.
And I loved that show. You know, I loved it because Dick Clark was progressive. You know, he had the pop stars, but he would also bring somebody new that was just getting started. And he just had all this information, you know, and I was like, how does he know this stuff? Who told him that? And then I started watching Soul Train, and Don Cornelius was just like the essence of soul, you know, the way he talked, the way his smooth transitions from one segment to another. And I was like, how do they know how to do that? And eventually in my head, I took a little bit from Dick Clark. I took a little bit from Don Cornelius. There was this other show called Soul, which was more public orientated, which was on PBS Channel 13. And I took a little bit of those guys, and that's how Ralph McDaniels became who he was.
And actual performances that you went to sort of early on, when you sort of saw this sort of magic happening on stage and the passing off to the crowd, was there one of the early groups that you saw that you remember where you were like, oh, this is it?
I remember my friend Russell Simmons. We both grew up in Queens. I'm originally from Brooklyn, but we moved to Queens. And my friend Russell Simmons said he was managing this artist named Curtis Blow. These Are the Breaks, Christmas rapping. He was hot in the streets. And he said, Ralph, Curtis is going to be opening up for The Clash at Bonds, which was a big club in Times Square. And I was like, The Clash is like a punk group. Like, why is he opening up for a punk group? He says, it's going to be fresh. It's going to be dope. You know, this is how Russell talked. So I said, okay, fine. You know, and I'm like punk rock and hip hop kind of were in the same space, but we didn't deal with each other at all. Two different people, two different groups. Nobody liked punk. I mean, the establishment didn't like punk. The establishment didn't like hip hop. But we both were kind of on the same path. And I said, all right. And I remember they booed Curtis Blow the whole time he was on stage. And it was like, you know, like throwing stuff at, it was like the Blues Brothers. They were throwing stuff. And Russell was like, this is dope. This is great. This is great. And because he knew that he had his artist in front of a crowd that would normally never see him. And that meant that there's a potential for crossover and getting into mainstream. And I learned a lot that night. You know, like Curtis just never stopped. He kept on rapping, even though they booed him, he kept on rapping. And at the end of the day, you know, that's how people got familiar with it. You kind of forced it on them. And, you know, and the shows got a little easier and you didn't have to get booed all the time.
And this was, at that point, you're one of the only people documenting hip hop in that way. And it's just you and a camera and a micro. I mean, what is it at that point?
Yeah, it's just me. You know, from the fact that I was working at the station, they said, you know, you can use the camera every once in a while if nobody's using it. And so I'd get one of the guys, the camera guys, and say, look, we're going to go out and shoot, you know. And they were happy because they weren't doing anything. They were doing more news stuff. They were like, what? You're gonna do music stuff? This is great. It was fun to them. And the thing when we walked into some of the parties was, it was usually very dark, you know, back then.
Yep.
And then we turn on this light and it would light the whole place up, you know, so I had to figure out, we can't, it's too much, the light's too much. We gotta figure out how to balance it out so it doesn't scare everybody away, because people thought it was the news. Like, what happened? Somebody got shot? Something happened?
Right.
You know?
Right. And so it was pretty basic. I mean, it was just sort of, I'm here, I'm trying to capture what's these sort of moments that are happening.
Yeah.
And over the years, we're not talking about just like, oh, you know, it's a couple of people in the beginning, but over the years, can you sort of name some of the artists who you've worked with? It's pretty much everybody, big, small, forgotten.
Yeah.
You know, tell me about it.
You know, in the 80s, because of Russell, we started working with Run DMC early. And one of the first concerts that we shot was this concert called the Fresh Fest. It's in the documentary. You're watching Video Music Box. And so that was Run DMC, this group called Houdini out of Brooklyn, who were friends of mine, Fat Boys, Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five, and a young guy named LL Cool J who had like one song at the time. He could only go. He opened up. He was the first guy to go on stage, and then everybody else came on, and that show, we aired it, and everyone saw it on Video Music Box and realized that hip hop was just not happening in the South Bronx anymore. It wasn't just happening in black communities or in Latino communities. It was happening everywhere. Like there were white kids there were Asian kids there. There were all types of folks that came to that show that were all into hip hop, and that was in 1985. Excuse me. And I was like, this is awesome, man. Like I've never seen, for myself, I had never seen it where, you know, all groups came together for one cause and everybody dressed the same. Everybody had on Adidas, everybody had their hat to the side, and everybody was chanting the songs and the lyrics, you know. And I was like, this has got to go to MTV. And that's when I took it. That's when I went to MTV and said, look, this is what's happening. But MTV wasn't ready yet. They weren't ready to make that transition. It was based on rock and roll. That's how MTV started. And that was what they wanted to do, you know. And hip hop and other musics were just starting to get going, dance music and things like that. It wasn't pop yet, you know. And Run DMC helped break the doors down because they used guitars in their sound. They were smart. It was a smart marketing tool by Run DMC, you know, and then eventually to have Aerosmith in the video with them.
Changed everything.
It changed everything.
That song changed everything.
Yeah.
And like any evolution of any sort of type of music, at some point the music does sort of evolve in the 90s to sort of, to just sort of a different style. And Nas is one of the first sort of this next generation of MCs. And you directed one of his first video, and he in turn directed this project. I mean, it's almost a 180. I don't want to call it full circle, but it's a 180. I mean, it's sort of like coming right back.
Yeah, it's coming right back, which was amazing to me because, you know, I met this kid, you know, he was like 17, you know, this young kid out of Queensbridge projects, and he's like, you know, I have some great music. I think you're gonna like it because I watch your show all the time. Wow. And I was like, all right. And they started playing the Illmatic album, and I was like, this is amazing. I can't even believe these words are coming out of this kid's head. And I was like, all right. And the label said, you know, we want to do a video, and there was this thing called an EPK that we did, like a press kit for him. And I did the video. It Ain't Hard to Tell was the first single, and he just never stopped. You know, he just kept on going. And here we are, you know, 30-something years later, and he is a part owner of the production company. He was just the executive producer when we started doing this. He was excited about it, and he helped sell it to Showtime, but he wasn't directing it at first. And then he turned and he said, you know what, I think I should direct this. And I was like, when do you have time to do this, bro? You got albums out, you're Nas, you know,
right.
And he was like, no, I want to take time to do this. This is very important to the culture. And I realized that I have to kind of like put hands on this one right here.
And when you sort of look at this, I mean, 50 years of hip hop is sort of what we're looking at here. Where do you see yourself in that larger picture?
I think people tell me that I'm one of the founding fathers. I'm not Kool Herc, I'm not Grandmaster Flash, I'm not Bambaataa, but from a visual standpoint, I was the guy who brought the visuals to the masses. Because you heard about these artists, you heard their songs back in the days, late at night on some radio station. You might have had Cool DJ Red Alert playing it, or Chuck Chill Out, or Mr. Magic, but you never saw them. All of a sudden, in the middle of the day, comes this guy, Ralph McDaniels, and he puts everybody on TV, from the DJs, to the artists, to the producers, to the dancers, to the people that were just going to the clubs. So I made it visual, and that was the key.
And we're talking about everybody from Jay-Z to Run DMC. I mean, who are we talking about here?
Jay-Z, Run DMC, Notorious B.I.G. We mentioned Nas. Mary J. Blige, first time she ever performed was at one of my parties. You know, you name it. You know, even actors. Like I remember Lawrence Fishburne. He used to come to the parties. You know, and J-Lo used to come to the parties. So many people that came out of the scene. Yeah.